Infinite in mystery is the gift of the goddess. We seek it thus, and take to the sky. Ripples form on the water's surface. The wandering soul knows no rest.
In the previous video in this series, we looked at a character who hasn't yet appeared in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and everyone's looking forward to this appearance, and that was Vincent Valentine. And in this episode, I want to do a similar thing. I want to look at a character that hasn't yet appeared in Final Fantasy VII Remake. But this is a character that kind of splits the fan base a little bit. A lot of people aren't the biggest fan of this character, other people love this character. It's going to be interesting to see how they pull this off, but I think that we need to spend a little bit of time and take a look at the background and then make some predictions for the future of Genesis Rhapsodos. The story of Genesis begins far before Final Fantasy VII and begins with the Jenova project. Now, the Jenova project was made up of two different SKUs, Project G and Project S. Project S was the one that created Sephiroth, and then Project G was the one that created Genesis and Angeal. Now, Project G revolved around Gillian Hewlett, and Genesis was injected with Jenova's cells after they had been transplanted into Gillian, which in turn granted him Jenova's abilities. Now, after the birth, Professor Hojo's Project S was deemed to be superior after the creation of Sephiroth, and Project G was shut down, with Genesis labelled as a failed experiment and being adopted by a family in Benora, the same village where Gillian Hewlett lived. This led to Angeal and Genesis growing up together, and as they grew older, the Wutai War came into effect. And during the war, Genesis envied Sephiroth's fame, and he and Angeal, a similar story to other characters that we know of, left for Midgar in order to join Soldier. The two became first class eventually, and even became friends to a degree with Sephiroth and socialised with him. They'd use the training room for combat and things like that, and this leads us to the scene that we see in Crisis Core, where, you get the big fight scene between Genesis and Angeal and Sephiroth, and at the end of it, Genesis is injured after he breaks Angeal's sword, and this slices into the top of Genesis's shoulder. Now, at first it was believed that this was a minor wound, but it refused to heal, and then Genesis's genetic structure began to degrade as part of the kind of aftermath of the Jenova experimentation on him. This leads to Professor Hollander claiming that he can help Genesis, as he knows the secrets of Genesis's birth and of the Jenova project. Now, Genesis and Hollander both kind of go rogue during the closing stages of the Wutai War, and Hollander sets about to produce clones of Genesis by injecting other people who defected from Shinra with Hollander and Genesis with Genesis's DNA, and this converted them into clones of Genesis. Now, the Wutai War ends, a few other things happen, Angeal goes missing, Zack gets attacked by Genesis copies, and things like that, but eventually we come to Benora, which is the town where Angeal and Genesis have both grown up. Now, Zack and Sung head to Benora in order to try and track down Genesis and find out as much information as they can. There are a lot of Genesis clones there. They find Genesis's parents have been killed. They find that Angeal's mother, Gillian, from Project G, has taken her own life in shame for taking part in the Jenova project, and then they find Genesis and they find Angeal. There's a little bit of a confrontation, Genesis summons Bahamut and things like that, but after Zack is victorious, Genesis tells Zack that he and Angeal are monsters, and flies away, leaving Zack and Sung to basically get out of the town before it's destroyed by Shinra to cover up what's gone down, which, it's a regular occurrence for Shinra, it would seem. Just wipe out a town. Never happened. Nothing was there. Now, the confrontations continue in the Shinra headquarters, in Midgar and places like that. Zack and Sephiroth find Hollander's lab and evidence of his part in creating the clones of Genesis, and at that point Genesis and Hollander both arrive. Now, Genesis shows that envy of Sephiroth, and he claims that Sephiroth's glory and fame ought to be his, and he starts to recite a passage from Loveless and asks Sephiroth which of them would be the hero of the story. And it's at this point that he reveals that he's hunting for the gift of the goddess that Loveless seems to allude to. And soon after, we get another meeting of the minds, so to speak, with Genesis, Angeal and Zack, and they kind of discuss the missing 5th chapter from Loveless, the 5th act that's not there, and how it leaves the story of Loveless unfinished, you know, like this battle between friends, this struggle between friends. It's left open-ended. And then Genesis leaves again. You know, this is a regular thing for Genesis. Swoop in, quote some Loveless, leave. He does what he does. Now, we got a few more confrontations with Genesis fighting Zack and Hollander being deemed useless at this point because Genesis has kind of reached the point where he realizes that it's Genova cells that he needs to try and reverse the degradation that he's going through. And after Genesis is defeated by Zack, he disappears. He kind of throws himself into a Mako reactor, and that's it. That's the end of Genesis. But a few months later, the army of Genesis clones reappear, and they kind of attack Shimmer in several locations, and during an attack on Junon, Hollander manages to escape from Shinra captivity. And you do see that Genesis himself is watching on, just unseen by anybody. Nobody notices him, but he's just there watching. So Genesis is back in motion. Which brings us then to the Nibelheim incident, and everybody knows what goes down in Nibelheim, or at least you thought you did, until Crisis Core. During the incident, Genesis confronts Sephiroth at the reactor's core, and he tells Sephiroth about the two SKUs of the Genova project, and that Angeal was the perfect monster of Project G, and Sephiroth is the perfect monster of Project S, and the whole project all around, basically. And just kind of reveals this information to him and tells Sephiroth about the origins of Genova. And yeah, I wish this wasn't here, but it is. But anyway, yeah, Genesis kind of points out that Sephiroth is the perfect product of Genova's cells, and it means that his cells will never degrade, and therefore Genesis wants Sephiroth's genetic material, basically, in order to cure his own degradation, which he doesn't get, obviously. And then we fast forward. Everything goes down, Nibelheim gets a bit hot. Now 4 years pass by, and Zack and Cloud break free from the Shinra Mansion, and they start to make their way back to Midgar. Now Genesis is after them purely because they've been experimented on during this time using Genova cells and Sephiroth cells and the same process and things like that. You know what I mean? They have been part of Project S at this point. They have been tested on by Hojo. So Genesis is confident that he can get what he needs out of either Zack or Cloud. Tries it with Zack, doesn't work. The theory is that because he was already a soldier first class, he rejected the Genova cells. Not too sure about that, but that's what the belief is in the game. And then Genesis kind of pivots to Cloud, and he wants the cells that Cloud carries. But at the end of this interaction, Genesis states that he has discovered the true end of Loveless, and then flies away into the night. Now, this eventually brings us to kind of like the remains of Benora, and Zack discovers the journal of a younger Genesis before he was a soldier, and that talks about how he invented the Benora White Apple juice, and how he wants to emulate Sephiroth, and he wants to be like Sephiroth, and he'd love to have Sephiroth eat a Benora White Apple, you know, things like that. You get an insight into this younger Genesis. And deeper into the caves, Zack finds these massive stone tablets with Loveless carved out on them, a goddess statue holding a gigantic natural materia, like a huge materia. Huge, not that huge, but huge nonetheless. And Genesis trying to find the gift of the goddess and trying to acquire that for himself. Now Genesis believes that he is the hero who has received the protection of the goddess. He absorbs the materia's power and goes into combat against Zack. He's defeated, but then he returns to a human form because he does kind of become a bit monstrous. Well, a bit monstrous, quite monstrous when he absorbs the power of the materia. And when he returns back to a human form, the degradation is gone completely. He's back to himself before the injury. He challenges Zack to a final duel as a soldier, and he is eventually struck down by Zack. But with Genesis, I think this was the main thing that he wanted. To a certain degree, he kind of regained his honor to a certain degree, and that's why he felt at the end that he could stand as an equal against Zack rather than as a monstrosity. I kind of feel like that's the vibe. I know Zack kind of muses on it a little bit in the game. Now at the end of the combat, Genesis is defeated, and he kind of finds himself in an area that's flooded with life stream, and he sees that the goddess statue's there, and it morphs into Minerva, who sees his desire to complete his duty as a soldier and spares his life. Basically, it grants him this boon of survival, and It's interesting, this one, because I don't... There's a lot of debate whether or not Genesis is just seeing what would be comforting to him. You know, you have a lot of... I mean, in literature and in stories as old as time, the gods tend to make themselves appear in a state that's comfortable for you. Something that you can comprehend and something that you can understand and something that puts you at ease in this moment. So it's possible that him seeing Minerva was just the live stream manifesting itself in a manner that was palatable to Genesis and his mindset at that moment in time. It could be numerous reasons, but after the fight, Zack carries Genesis out of the cave as he's spared by the live stream. So Zack carries Genesis out and the live stream spares his life. Now eventually Zack and Cloud, they move on, but Genesis is kind of left where he is. So he kind of passes out, goes into unconsciousness, Zack and Cloud leave, and Genesis is just kind of sat there, propped up against a rock, gonna survive, but he needs to recuperate a little bit. It's not long after this that a Shinra helicopter lands nearby, and we see two first-class soldier members with deep ground symbols on their belt get out of the helicopter, pick Genesis up, leaving the book behind as well, leaving Loveless behind, which I believe is potentially going to be symbolic about the future mindset of Genesis and how he's potentially going to step away from Loveless now because that story is complete. And maybe we're going to see a completely different kind of Genesis. But that's speculation, wild speculation. The two figures load Genesis onto the helicopter and leave. And at the end of the game, Genesis's voice recites the final act of Loveless that appears on the book. Which, yeah, is probably not the actual final act of Loveless. It's just Genesis filling in the gaps. Now, Genesis ends up being brought to Deep Ground. And Deep Ground is a massive facility underneath Midgar where testing regarding certain aspects of the Genova project and other testing seem to go ahead. The two members that collected him, Vice and Nero, they attempt to persuade him to join in the rebellion that they've got going against the Restrictors, but Genesis chooses not to and seals himself underneath Midgar, kind of waiting for the day when he would be needed to protect the world when Sephiroth and Angeal aren't there, when he is needed. And once we get to Dirge of Cerberus, Vincent discovers that according to Scarlet's private files, that the coloured Spheex had been injected with Genesis's cells and subjected to further experimentation to see how that took and see what improvements could be made on the coloured Spheex. And once we come to the end of Dirge of Cerberus with that whole story playing out, Vice's body lies in a flooded cavern after the battle between Chaos and Omega, and it awakens Genesis. This disturbs Genesis. And Genesis approaches Vice and says to him, it is not yet time for slumber, and that they have much work to do. He picks up his brother and flies off into the night. So that's everything that we've got on Genesis in the Final Fantasy VII compilation so far. And it does leave us with a few questions and a few possibilities for what can go on. Now, the first of these questions is, are we even going to see Genesis in Final Fantasy VII Remake? And while I'm not 100% that we'll specifically see Genesis, you know, see him walking around, interacting in the world, getting involved in battles with people or anything like that, it's a possibility, but I'm not necessarily convinced. I do feel like Genesis is going to be a part of the overall story of Remake, because Genesis's legacy and Genesis's effect on things could easily be a part of the narrative without Genesis himself specifically being a part of the narrative. There's possibilities. There's definite possibilities. Now, one of the obvious questions is, what went down with Genesis after Dirge of Cerberus? What actions did he take? How did these actions involve Vice? And did these actions benefit Sephiroth in any way, shape or form? Were these actions at the behest of Sephiroth? Does Sephiroth have some degree of control over Genesis due to the Genova cells within him? Or has the gift of the goddess, so to speak, kind of purified Genesis and kind of held Genova back and made it so that he can't be controlled or he can't be subjected to the same sort of visions that we see people like Cloud being subjected to? There's not really any evidence or any information going forwards for what could have actually happened after Dirge of Cerberus. We literally have no context to it. But if it does turn out that this is a Sephiroth that's come back from the past, and a Sephiroth that's trying to affect change in this live stream because of the future events that he knows are going to happen because he's already lived through them, maybe he's involved Genesis to some degree. Maybe he has somehow managed to use the Jenova in Genesis to manipulate him and to twist his mind to the point where he actually unknowingly benefits Sephiroth and enables him to do what he seems to do in Remake. It's entirely speculation because, like I say, we don't know what happens with Genesis afterwards. We need to get some kind of information on that if he is going to be involved in Remake. Especially if this is like a Genesis from the same timeline as Sephiroth, or this potential future Sephiroth. If it turns out that we're dealing with one timeline and it's just Genesis underneath Midgar, then maybe not. We need, like I say, we need some information about what happened with Genesis. Now, getting into a couple of different questions. The first one in my mind would be, where is Genesis during Remake? Is he indeed ground still? Because in this timeline, Genesis should currently be residing underneath Midgar in a cavern, just kind of chilling. And does this Genesis perceive what's going on? Does this Genesis know that Sephiroth is kind of doing his thing? I would say that Genesis probably is in the cave. Whether or not he's able to do anything about anything, who knows? There is the possibility that Sephiroth has done what he's done. Maybe Genesis has been able to mirror that and do the same thing, or at least in the same way that Aerith seems to have knowledge of the future by these memories, maybe Genesis has been acquiring these memories as well. We could see Genesis just kind of come out of the cave early in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. There are a lot of possibilities surrounding it, but I would say that during Remake, he's probably still there. I would say like 85% certainty that Genesis is there in the cave underneath Midgar. But then another question is, what kind of state is Genesis in? Is Genesis, because he was spared by the livestream, he was cured of his degradation, could Genesis also now be considered as a perfect product of the Jenova project? Obviously this has been achieved by some sort of power from the livestream, but he has Jenova's powers, we would assume still. You know, we still see the wing at the end of Dirge of Cerberus, so we know that he still has that Jenova power within him. Is it just been controlled and refined to the point where he's now a perfect product like Sephiroth? And if so, is his power comparable to Sephiroth? Because that could lead to a lot of conflict potentially between Sephiroth and Genesis, or it could lead to the party being face down with both Genesis and Sephiroth. And either way, that's quite daunting. Like, imagine that, just standing there in a battle and you've got Sephiroth and Genesis stood across from you. That's going to get messy, especially if it is a Genesis that's kind of purified and can tap into the power of Jenova to the same degree that Sephiroth can. That'd be ludicrous. I don't personally like that. I kind of feel like Sephiroth should remain at the tippy top, but it's a possibility. Even if he becomes relative in power to Sephiroth, it's a monumental jump. And I suppose it all depends on what the gift of the goddess actually was. Like, was it something tangible that was given to Genesis by the livestream, or more importantly, taken away from Genesis by the livestream in the guise of taking away his degradation, taking away his impurities? Or was the gift of the goddess something more internal, kind of like a mental block that Genesis had, something that he was being held back by? But now that he's got some degree of closure from Crisis Core, he's untethered, shall we say. There are a couple of different avenues that it could go. I would say the gift of the goddess is kind of an amalgamation of those two things. I would say it's both. I say there was a genuine physical curing of Genesis and purification of Genesis as far as the live stream could achieve, but there was also within Genesis there was a lot of things that kind of held him up and kind of held him in the past and tied him to this envy that he had of Sephiroth and things like that. And I think now that we've gone beyond the end of Crisis Core, I feel like that's gone to a degree. It remains to be seen. We've not really seen, well, we haven't seen any depiction of Genesis other than in a cave just picking up Vice and leaving. So we don't really know where he is at. One thing's for certain, the first time we see Genesis, we're going to get a lot of context for where his mind is, and we're potentially going to get a lot of answers. So I'm kind of looking forward to it, because Deep Ground's already been involved. I can't see Genesis being left out. Angeal, yes, because Angeal is gone. Angeal's gone. Genesis, however, canonically is alive, so why not? So I guess that brings the next question, which is, which side of the battle is Genesis going to be on? And that's a real tough one. That is a massively tough one. He's always had issues with Sephiroth, but he's always at the same time looked up to Sephiroth and aspired to be like Sephiroth, and Sephiroth's opinion matters to Genesis. But like we've just discussed, Genesis could potentially have moved past all of that. He could have received a degree of clarity. He could have his own equally messed up mission that he's on, which doesn't involve Sephiroth in any way. He could be going about his own thing. He could still be a bad guy. I'm not saying that he's necessarily... This clarity of mind won't necessarily make him good. It will make him more capable, more able. But as far as which side he's going to fall on, it's tough. I mean, if he falls on the side of the planet, we all know how the planet reacts at certain points of the narrative of Final Fantasy VII. The live stream's done with people and everything that's going on the planet. The planet is like teetering on the edge of causing its own apocalypse just to get rid of everything at certain points. The weapons get summoned. Do you know what I mean? The planet, the live stream, neither of these things are happy. Neither of these things are content with the way things are panning out. And if Genesis has become like a warrior, an avatar, a knight of the live stream, the protector of the live stream, so to speak, maybe he goes on his own semi-genocidal mission. Maybe he takes up the role of Chaos, potentially. Maybe... We discussed it in the previous video about Vincent Valentine and about how Sephiroth could have messed with Vincent, and Vincent could end up losing control of Chaos, and then he could potentially, you know, end up being the final boss of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. What if it's not Sephiroth that messes with him? What if it's Genesis that messes with him? What if Genesis wants to acquire or unleash the power of Chaos, as that is the live stream's will at this stage? It might not be Sephiroth's doing at all. I suppose it would by proxy be Sephiroth's doing, because he's caused the whole situation that's going on right now, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Maybe Genesis is the one that releases Chaos. It's possible. It's possible. I very much doubt we'll see Genesis fighting on our side. That's kind of where I'm at. I don't think he's going to be a good guy, but I don't necessarily think he's going to be a bad guy in the sense of Sephiroth. I think he could potentially become like an avatar of the planet and almost try and trigger the events that the planet might want to happen. So yeah, it could be very much a story of grey areas with Genesis coming into Final Fantasy VII Remake. For a while, I did kind of think that we might see some sort of mirroring going on with like the Cloud and Sephiroth story happening and the Zack and Genesis story happening. I don't know if that's going to be the case anymore. It kind of all depends on the layout of the timelines. A lot of these things rely on, are we in one timeline? Are we in one reality? Are there two realities? Did Remake happen in the live stream? All of these possibilities, we need some degree of clarification on them. So yeah, I don't want to speculate too far on that. But either way, I kind of feel like they're setting it up for Genesis to step into this story and play, if not a critical part of the story, a substantial part of the story. I think he is going to have a part to play. We've already seen Deep Ground. We've already seen his progeny, so to speak. And it seems like they're kind of weaving the whole compilation into one kind of tapestry with Final Fantasy VII Remake. So Genesis is a part of that tapestry. Genesis is canonically alive at this point, unless Sephiroth's like snuck under Midgar and cut his head off or something, which I very much doubt. You never know though, but I very much doubt. Then Genesis should show up, even if it's just a fleeting moment. Just like we should be able to visit some of these locations, like the Benora Underground and things like that. Like, these are places now that are, while they weren't a part of the original Final Fantasy VII, the canon in world, they're on the map still. Granted, most of them are charred cinders and remains of what village and town used to stand there, but you know, that's the Shinra way. I think there's a good chance that we could visit places like Benora. Like, it would not amaze me. It would not amaze me. But I think we've reached the point of the video where I need to ask what you think. What do you think's going down with Genesis? Like, do you think that he is going to appear? Do you think he's not going to appear? Do you think he's going to be on Sephiroth's side? Do you think he's going to be on his own side? Do you think he's going to be on our side? Let me know what you think about Genesis in Final Fantasy VII Remake, what the possibilities could be. And yeah, just let me know what you think. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget, drop a like on the video, subscribe for future content. I'm going to come up with a couple more of these character videos in the very near future. But more importantly than anything, have a great day.